Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Inside the Stage Door. Today's guest is theatre technician, database developer, set designer, university lecturer, producer, and of course director and owner of Joh Hartog Productions, Joh Hartog. Welcome to Inside the Stage Door, Joh.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, if I could just start with a couple of quotes. Director Joh Hartog has done an extraordinary job with Perplex. Director Joh Hartog has come up trumps with this outstanding production. Fifu and Her Friends provides a unique theatre experience that is rare to find. It is rare indeed to encounter a show that intrigues, challenges, stimulates and entertains, all in one lively, well-paced package. Joh, what goes through your mind when you hear those sort of quotes?
Well, I'm not taking those comments all that seriously. It's nice to hear, of course, but if you start to believe all of that sort of fantastic stuff that people say about you, then you are in very great danger of stepping on a pedestal that you only can fall off.
Yes, understand. Now, Joh, how long have you been involved in the theatre world?
The first way I seriously got involved in theatre was in the late 60s in Sydney. I had an experience with theatre before, and it's always been my understanding of myself that I've been trying to live that down for the rest of my life. I was a good friend of mine at school was part of the annual theatre business situation, and he said to me, "Why don't you become a part of it?" And I did, and to my utter shock and horror, they actually cast me in the main role. If I remember correctly, the play was called Cat and the Canary. You know, it's one of those old-fashioned pot boilers style of stuff. But there's always the young male and female leads that fall in love, etc. Now, I was 15. That sort of life had not even come close to me yet. And so I actually made a complete pig's ear of it during the rehearsals, and eventually, fortunately for me as well as for the production, they replaced me a week before it was opening.
Right.
On the one hand, that's a bit disappointing, and at the same time, it was also a great relief because I knew I could not even begin to do that. But they gave me another role in the same production, the third act, in which I had 3 lines. I was the doctor, came in upstage, came down the center, asked a question, and then had 2 more lines, and then I would leave again. And you know, I forgot the lines.
Oh, no.
And it wasn't even like, oh my God, I've forgotten the lines. It was more like, well, I've said my say. I'm now waiting for other people to say theirs, and they're looking at me and say, well, you know how it goes. So it was only when I came off stage that I realized, it was me who had actually something to say. But that was a really rather negative experience, and after that, well, I just had to make up for it, didn't I?
Right. Now, could you share with myself and our viewers a little bit about your time and experience as a lecturer at Flinders University?
Well, basically, I thoroughly enjoyed it from beginning to end, dealing with students. I enjoyed a lot less dealing with staff and all the politics that go around in universities, unfortunately, but I survived it well enough till I retired, which is about 5 years ago now. And but yes, I did, but I've never thought that I would become a teacher. A teacher is not something that I ever aspire to be. I totally loathed high school. Primary school I didn't like very much either, but high school I truly loathed, and I never finished it. I left it, and I still don't feel comfortable being in high school now at this stage. But at about early 40s, I decided that, well, I could get back to official learning again, and basically didn't look back from that. Got to the university, wanted to do the directing course because I had done directing by that time a fair bit, but I was also beginning to realize I was repeating patterns and that I really needed a much broader approach to be able to do justice to the plays that I was doing, and not doing, because you do the same things without even knowing that you're doing the same things all the time. And so I went to, I applied to get into the drama centre. At the time, we lived in northern New South Wales. We'd never been to Adelaide before, and it seemed like a good place to go. So we went to Adelaide, and I passed the audition and became a student at the drama centre, as well as, of course, doing the theory. And when I finished that, if I pat myself on the back, I could say that I actually won the university medal as well.
Wow.
Which I'm kind of proud of.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And it's still somewhere. I did a bit of part-time teaching at the time, concessional teaching from 92 to 94, and then became full-time employed at university, because by that time I was in my mid-40s, and well, at the best of times, it's very hard to make a living out of theatre as a director or as an actor or as anything. And so the fact that I actually felt quite good about teaching, which, as I said, I didn't expect to do that, I've sort of fitted in quite well. And from then, well, it's all history from there on, so to speak.
Thank you, Joh. Now, in 2007, you set up Accidental Productions. What was the impetus behind this?
That's difficult to say in some ways, but my way of working at university had changed, and I found it necessary to start doing something outside the university, not always inside the university. While it's great working with actors, with students, and it was, and I always have enjoyed it in every occasion. At times it'd be nice to work with some older people, or people that are the right age for the parts that they play. You get used to it. You get used to a 20-year-old playing a 60-year-old. You get used to that. But of course, then suddenly when you do work with somebody who's 60-year-old, then suddenly you realize what you've been missing.
Yes.
So in some ways, with not that I immediately did that, because I set up Accidental Productions with 4 or 5 other students who had just graduated. And we started with that, and that went on for about 3 or 4 years, I think, which were very rich years of doing outside work. But they were all young too, so while they were growing up, by the end they were 26, 27, but young people are young people, and so they wanted to spread their wings. So off they went here and there and everywhere, and some came back. And so the personnel changed, and then after a while, it went into kind of hibernation.
Yeah.
And I did some shows with the Bakehouse itself, just for the Bakehouse, as the Bakehouse. And after that, we set out Joh Hartog Productions. And so basically, it's the one thing. Accidental Productions just morphed into Joh Hartog Productions. And I was only being pushed in naming it after myself, because I'm still not feeling all that crash hot about that.
Right. Now, if I could move back in time slightly, I believe you were involved in the early days with the Red Shed Theatre Company, which is the space of the Bakehouse, which I remember very well. What was the production, and what did you do on the production?
To start with, I was only involved as a student. So in the late 80s, early 90s, as part of a fringe event by the Drama Centre, the Drama Centre would do a fringe production over 2 or 3 weeks. There would be a series of productions, and directing students would then do a play.
Yeah.
In the first year, I did a silly little play called The Servant of Two Masters, but it may be The Master of Two Servants.
Right.
It's the opposite of the Goldoni play.
Right.
And it is a Traverse play from the theatre, the Traverse Theatre in Edinburgh, where it was, I think, at the time, premiered, which is all in verse, and it is a completely silly idea of this couple that fight, and then they have these 2 servants that are having it off with each other.
Right.
And we included in it a tango that was being built, that was being done on the table, and the 2 actors on the table. But I built the table in such a way that if you stood on one side, it would swing up. It would start to fall over. But it was very long, but we put a chair under it so that you could only go so far. and then forward and backwards, then the tail would go up, and then the tail would go up the other way, and that was tremendous. And then in the end, when the male servant takes a chainsaw, an actual chainsaw, an electric one, but an actual chainsaw, and sawed the table in half.
Right.
And I got a lot of comments of audience members who thought we were taking far too many risks. And a year later, I think that was the last one I did there as a student, was the ball prima donna. And that was great. I loved UNESCO. I grew up with UNESCO, so to speak. I'm an absolute absurdist in my blood.
Is that leads me to my next question, Joh? Is absurdity the reason why you select your plays?
I think absurdism is a way of looking at the world that appeals tremendously to me. As a fundamental thing that we live in an indifferent universe that really couldn't care less about us. We have to make our own meaning, and that meaning is fraught. It is always in contest what that meaning could possibly be, and we have no control. Ultimately, we have no control. So I found that as a philosophy, it appealed to me, and as this mix of strange existence, it appealed to me as well.
Right. Thank you, Joh. Now, last year, before this craziness of the pandemic hit, you had great success with a play called Brilliant Traces at the Bakehouse, winning the Group Award for Professional Theatre from the Adelaide Critics Circle. I was wondering if you could take us through what the play was about and the rehearsal process with Crystal and Brendan.
It's about being lost and then being found by the other, if you like. That's to put it simply. But there's a lot of humour in it, and there's a lot of, almost absurdism in it. And it is set in an Alaskan hut. It's almost like a Shakespearean forest where wild things can happen. And Brendan is the one that lives in that hut because he's had a difficult past, etc., and he's sort of become a hermit. And she arrives in a car from the southern United States in turmoil and ends up in this blizzard in her wedding dress. And if you take the play totally naturalistically, she would have been dead because she'd been frozen to death.
Exactly.
And she would never have got to the bloody thing in the first place. But you know how it is. So they get there, and then the next hour and a bit is them circling around each other and digging into each other in a kind of naturalistic way of revealing more and more about themselves. It was an interesting exercise because it can be taken as a love story. So you could then say, well, in the end, they fall into each other's arms and kiss and blah, blah, blah. But we actually really wanted to avoid that because we felt that if you take it as just a romantic story, then many people have done it, no doubt. But if you do it just as a romantic story, then it becomes a bit cliche. And the issues that you are trying to foreground are getting buried under this sentimental coat of boy meets girl. Yeah. So as far as they were concerned, they did an excellent job, and they bounced wonderfully off each other. They were really, they were so such an excellent couple. Yeah. But we went specifically a bit overboard on the set, and I think that was one of the reasons why we won the award, because we built an entire hut, 2 sides and 2 half sides, so you could look into it, with a floor and walls and hollow snow around it. And we had a stove in there, which we could belch smoke out of. It looked absolutely wonderful.
You designed the set?
Yeah, I designed the set.
Well, it's part of Adelaide history now that when the audience came in, Peter Green from the Bakehouse was said, "Don't step on the snow. Don't step on the snow."
And that was wise words, I tell you, because it was so slippery. Yeah. It wasn't that you couldn't step on it because you would spoil the effect. You would kill yourself by stepping on it. Your foot would just absolutely slide away.
Right.
But we survived it.
Thank you, Joh. Now, Your company, Joh Hartog Productions, is a professional profit share model, I believe.
Yeah.
Why is it important to pay actors for their work?
To some extent, you've got to make a division, and this is a really difficult division to make, between amateur and professional theatre.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that amateur theatre is always bad and professional is always good, because we both know that's not true.
Yes.
You can have sometimes very good amateur productions and pretty poor professional productions. But there is a different attitude. I think that when you take it as your job, as your profession, as your work, you put a different level of activity into it, a different level of intensity into it, and that needs to be paid if you possibly can. I know that in the end a painter can paint, and if they don't sell their painting, that's okay, but they would love to paint to sell it, because selling it and thereby making money means that you are recompensed for the effort that you put in. But it is a recognition that what you do is not just for fun, that what you do is not just a hobby. It's not just that you do alongside what you act, where your money normally comes from. So the idea, even if you get a cup of coffee out of it, is better than nothing.
Yes.
And of course, unfortunately, profit sharing and the fact that there's so little money available for professional theatre outside the subsidized theatres, that what you can get out of it is always going to be limited. And that's sad, and I wish that could change, but unfortunately, we live in the world that we live in.
We do, yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Joh, how has COVID affected you creatively, and how have you tried to stay creative during this lockdown period?
I haven't actually particularly hard tried to stay creative. In a way, it's a problem. So in March we were rehearsing a Rabbit Hole, which we were going to open up with at the end of April, and from basically one day to the next, that stopped. First of all, we thought, we'll keep on going until it reaches a certain stage and then we'll stop. But we had to stop earlier because one of the actors had a scratchy throat and might have had COVID. He didn't have COVID. And so we couldn't even then take the risk. So we just had to stop everything. That's like falling off a cliff. You can't prepare for it. You can't simply set up. A few weeks off is no worries. I'm happy with a few weeks off.
Yeah.
And doing nothing much at all. But then you suddenly realize, well, we don't know when this is coming back. No. And then I thought, like a lot of other people have done, of course, and like what you're doing, is I'll put, I could do something on YouTube, I could do something virtual, stuff like that. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't actually want to do that.
Right.
That my one abiding interest is live theatre. I couldn't see how I could do that in any other way than doing live theatre. I have done some filming in the past, but I just don't like it. The whole idea of staring at a monitor rather than at the actor, I find distasteful.
Right.
I know it's not, because a lot of people do it, and that's what you have to do when you make films and stuff and television, but I find it distasteful. I want to directly look at an actor, work with the actor, rather than through the screen.
Right.
And that's why I thought, no, I'm just not doing it. I'm nearly 75. I'm not going to do things that I don't actually think are terribly valid for me to do. I'm just hoping that next year will be that we're back into the normal routine, but by no means certain. If so, then we just simply do our whole 2020 season 2021.
Now that leads me to my next question. Joh Hartog, are the arts important to society?
James, that is a silly question.
I ask it of all my guests.
I know, because I've seen it.
Because there are some people who think the arts are not important at all. What's the point of dance? What's the point of movies, of theatre? It's a waste of time. So I think it's an interesting question.
Oh, of course, it's an interesting question, but it is also a very difficult one to answer. I'll tell you another anecdote. When I came to Australia first in 1965,
Yeah.
Australia was regarded, certainly by Europeans like myself, as culturally a bit of a backwater. And a colleague of mine where I was working, it was a resin factory, but I was invited by one of the other workers there to Saturday afternoon sailing. And I had a debate. I remember I had a debate about this guy about culture. He said, and he's, make a long story short, he said, "Who needs culture? You don't need culture. A good boat and a beer afterwards, well, that's all you need." And then afterwards I thought, but that is culture. That is culture.
Yeah.
So culture is as important here as it is anywhere else. The arts as part of culture may not be quite so important here as it is in Europe in particular. But I don't know, they have lack of money there too, but there is much more subsidized theatre, of course, and
Absolutely.
you can do more. But it's also a vastly bigger environment than our, and one of the things that they do in Holland, for instance, is they still do that, although the system is now different than when I was young, is they tour a lot. And almost no company play, only in Amsterdam might they play for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, that's all, because then they tour. And they go to all of these places all over, well, it's not a very big country, but they go all over the country. So you don't have to go to the theatre, you wait till the theatre comes to you. Now that would be great to do here, except the country's too big. You could maybe do it in a city, in the whole city of Adelaide, or you could do the whole city of, but it's not part of the system here, which I think is a pity, because in that way you could actually, you could make yourself available, you could make theatre available to a much broader audience. But maybe we've missed the boat there, because live theatre is simply not all that attractive to a lot of people.
Correct. Thank you for that answer. Joh, just before we go, I was wondering, what advice would you have for a young person looking to get into the theatre?
If young people would listen to any kind of advice, which I'm afraid in my experience they don't, you would start by saying you're not likely to make a living out of it. If you want to do it because you want to do it. You can be part of a profit share organization. You can also go to the amateur and do it there. It doesn't really matter where you do it if that's what you want to do. But don't get the stars out of your eyes, because you are not, most likely, you're not the one that's going to make it.
Yeah.
I think that the actors and directors that make a living, an actual living out of it in this country, well, you wouldn't get that very far, would you?
No, that's right.
And a lot of extremely good actors who just work so now and then and have to make it up in other ways by teaching or by doing other kind of work in the meantime. So I would say, don't do it for fame. Don't do it because you want to be recognized. Don't do it for egotistical reasons, although of course there's ego involved in some way or another. Do it because you like the art. It's called Fame, I think. It was a documentary, an English documentary, somewhat a while back, and I only saw the last episode of it. It followed two girls in RADA, I think, and after they graduated, a year later, neither of them had a job.
Right.
At all, a job. But it was the commentators or the narrators' next line that struck me, is that at the end of this first year out, they haven't got a job, and now 278 new people are on the market who have just graduated. That's the reality of it.
That's the reality, yes. Joh Hartog, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on Inside the Stage Door. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you very much.
I've been James McCluskey Garcia from Reading Companions Australia. I'd like to thank our regular contributors to this episode, Tepai Films, Ipskip Productions, All Pro Audio and Tempo for Two Productions. Don't forget to like and share our page for upcoming episodes. Thanks for watching.